Makaniye basically decided to blame the Tutsi refugees for being responsible for the massacres that the Tutsis in Rwanda had actually been subjected to, and advancing that basically the Tutsis wanted to dominate over other ethnies, and they argued that they actually planned to kill the Hutus, and it was a legitimate defense. And in that communique from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Rwandan government at the time, this fact, and that was in January 1964, and that was following the ethnic massacres of 1963. At the same time, within the same communique from the government, Rwanda rushed a mission led by the President of the National Assembly at the time to Europe that actually stayed there for a month and a half. The National Assembly Speaker went to Europe and Northern Africa, Mr. Anastase Makuza, who was the Speaker of the National Assembly. And the speeches that he made were basically hate speeches, full of unqualifiable hate. And therefore, it should be noted that the denial that was actually found out in 1994 was not something new. And if I indeed try to explain this historical fact, it is so you can all understand that once they were vanquished, once the perpetrators were vanquished in 1994, they resorted to denialism, because this was their only way out, and this was a system that was already established. They very well knew that they would basically blame the Tutsis for the genocide. And denialism in Rwanda actually had deep-rooted roots, and in 1963, and more specifically on the 29th of May 1963, President Kayibanda, realizing that the massacres perpetrated in 1959, 60, 61 were very serious, and that the population had massively participated in those massacres, did establish impunity, which was such that the perpetrators of the massacres of the Tutsis between 1959 until the law was voted, that they would not be subjected to any legal recourse or legal process, and this so-called revolution in 1959 had the intention of basically killing the Tutsis in 1959. So denialism was basically instituted in the law, and the youth must understand this. This was a phenomenon that was rooted into the crime itself. The Tutsis started being massacred in 1959 and the years that followed that. So I won't be too long, and I will now move forward to 1990. In 1990, I will refer to some of the government paper called Imvaho. And since the Liberation War started by the RPF in 1990, the denial phenomenon did actually begin through state media, and particularly the written press. And the Tutsis were actually qualified as foreigners and enemies of Rwanda. And all these articles of the Imvaho paper considered the RPF as an enemy of Rwanda as a foreign-led force. And yet, these were Rwandans, and they were called enemies of Rwanda. And basically, they had to be exterminated, they had to be fought. And therefore, there is an element of denialism in there. And this became how difficult it is.
I'll give you a few examples. October 1990, Imvaho 865 of 22nd October 1990. It was just a few weeks into the liberation struggle. Nyirabikari Helena writes this. Taxis played a role in infiltrating enemies of the state around the country. This means that Tutsis needed to be hunted down because this public transport had contributed to transporting these enemies of the state all around the country. So this is a headline. So any reader will immediately understand that every Tutsi is the enemy of the state, especially those who are refugees. And then they continue saying that our country is fighting the enemies of the state. That term was recurrent in that literature, in the media. They say this country, in the fight against enemies of the state, it requires of us to have an authorization to drive your own car, an authorization given by the mayor of the city. So they write those cockroaches, although they're all enemies of the state, all of them. And they write Rwigema's enemies of the state was the RPF commander. They'd say those cockroaches, those enemies of the state, are led by Rwigema, and they are intent to disrupt our society. But they can't win. We're not that weak. The factor that explains that we will overcome is that we have an iron shield in President Habyarimana. So that's an article. So the enemies of state appears 3 times in just what I've just read. The issue 1866, October 1990, by Joseph Ndabamenye, who was the chief editor. Here is the headline: No negotiations with the rebels. And he writes this: the enemies of the state must grab their weapons and go back where they came from. Otherwise, the national army will pursue them and fight them, and as they've always done. His colleague Hategekimana Veneranda and all these journalists, Veneranda died very recently. He lived here, same as Joseph Ndabamenye. People know them. This is not fiction. Hategekimana Veneranda says, we have news that enemies of the state are trying to use the youth, teenagers. Another issue with Habimana Kantano, he says, we've defeated the Inyenzi. Those enemies of the state who call themselves Inkotanyi invaded our country. We overcame these enemies of the state and they regret having attacked. And Nyirasafari Stephanie, in another issue, writes this: the accomplices are still around within our society, so our mission is to hunt them down and find them. In Imvaho 888 by Sensoga Gaspar, they say cholera will decimate Inkotanyi in the Virunga forest. And he also say the enemies of the state who attacked Ruhengeri came from Uganda. Those are just a few headlines. There's another newspaper which is unsuspected. It's called Kinyamateka, which is a Catholic Church's newspaper. Even today, it's hard to suspect them, to believe they were part of this ideology. But they did. Kinyamateka was in this part, within this movement. Father Sibomana was spreading these Paramehutu ideas. He was against Inhotanyi, and his articles target Inhotanyi. That he says there are traitors. He means Tutsis from within the country. Traitors who ran to welcome those enemies of the state. So he says the Tutsis in the country are traitors, and the RPF are enemies of the state. So you understand the one who is not part of that group, and calling them to defend themselves by killing those people. Another issue, Kinyamateka of October 1990, they write this: enemies of the state who attacked us are called Inhotanyi. They also talk about Rwigema's death. They say that Rwandans celebrated Rwigema's death, and they give an example. And they say that even seminarians in Nyakiwanda celebrated this. Here, these are the words they use: those young men who are ready to become priests, they condemn them using the Holy Spirit. They call them, "You are a son of a bitch, Mr. Rwigema." So do you think they believe that Rwigema is a human being? That's denialism. So you dehumanize the person you target. So those are seminarians they are talking about. That using the Holy Spirit, they condemn him and calling him a son of a bitch. And they don't even call him Rwigema anymore. They would call him Rwiroha, which means suicidal. And another Kinyamateka issue, 360. They used enemy of the state 20 times. So I did the count again before I came here. 20 times in one article, saying that Tutsis and Inhotanyi are the enemy of the state. So as you talk about denialism, it is right there. So think about those concepts and those terms that were used all of those years. So Jambo News and others, Father Rudakimwanda, Gijimana, they use the same terms today. And they draw from that. This is continuity. That's the ideology they grew up with. Now, it's very important to fight this denialism. You need to understand this. You, especially the youth, because you have many years before you. Because this spreading this ideology, they include other young people. So you need to stand up and counter them. You can't let them win that fight. Why would you be defeated in this fight? When they tweet something, why don't we, why are we absent in that battle? Tell them, find these documents. We can share these documents. Then post this. Why would Jambo groups and people, Norma Shimga and others, why would they speak louder than you? And then tell them, this is what your fathers did, this is what they wrote. Tell them you are spreading your father's ideology and we don't accept that. It's unacceptable. Tell them that our country has been rebuilding, is unified, so there's no enemy of the state in Rwanda anymore. So you cannot accept that. For you to not be defeated, you need to show them how this is evil and show them these speeches and explain that those who accepted it and went and killed Rwandans, and they forgot that Tutsis are Rwandans themselves. Thank you. Please forgive me. I will have to leave before the end of the program, but we are in this fight together. Thank you.
arakoze cyane nyakubahwa.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Full of information, so that we can use that information for the this denialism that we are talking about. So I would like to remind you that the purpose of our conference today is to promote the international dialogue and focus on the theme Rubyiruko Menya Amateka Yawe, which is in line with the objectives of Kwibuka 30. It is again a pleasure. So we are honored to be with the panelists for today's event, who will contribute by their expertise to our discussion. And it is an opportunity to discuss the various mechanisms of the denier over the past 30 years and its impact in the great region, notably in DRC and in today's world. So I would like to introduce them. Je vais commencer par le Dr. Bideri.
I will start by inviting Dr. Bideri, legal expert, a PhD holder from the University of Strasbourg, prosecutor since 2003. He was a legal advisor, principal legal advisor at the Commission against the genocide. He did write a number of books, including Rwanda 1990-1993, the massacre of the Bagogwe, a prelude to the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994.
Hélène Dumas. Hélène, elle est chargée de recherche au Centre d'études sociologiques.
In charge of research at the CNRS. She also works on the history of the
genocide perpetrated against Tutsi. She has published numerous articles on the denialism of the genocide against the Tutsi and on the impact of racism and genocide ideology in the Great Lakes region and diaspora. Welcome, Jessica. Puis on est aussi avec Dr.
And then we're also with Dr. Boyan Koulibaly.
From the University of Orient Tours. Her research focuses on African history and political thought, conflict, discourse analysis, and atrocity prevention. Her other areas of interest are languages education, policy in Africa, and publishing in African language. Now she currently manages the Harvard African Language Program. Dr. Boyan has held teaching appointments at Harvard University, Rutgers, Gaston University, the University of Toulouse, and the University of Orient. So before we dive into my question and the audience's questions, each panelist will address the theme of denialism by a presentation from their respective perspective. So without taking too much time, I'll begin with Jessica for her presentation.
Merci beaucoup. Merci pour cette invitation. Du génocide contre les Tutsis au Rwanda et la continuation de l'idéologie. Ces différentes formes de la négation ou encore sous une expression franche de haine anti-Tutsi. Nous faisons face, nous, activistes, écrivains, universitaires et autres défenseurs de la mémoire, à une incompréhension majeure pour notre public, mais aussi beaucoup au sein de nos propres rangs. Bien souvent, les analyses contournent.
Very often, the analysis shows that racist ideologies are disputed. All of this is racist, but at the same time, we don't actually dig deeper to look into the political roots which constitute the basis of hatred against the Tutsi. What I would like to say today is that if we miss this opportunity in regards to our history, we miss everything. The analysis of facts, of stakeholders, of complicities, but also we can also miss the difficulty in changing mentalities, but also in understanding the narrative on the causes of the systematic assassination of our families, on the causes of the genocide against the Tutsi. But some of you might be asking themselves, what is she saying? Does she mean that nobody understands what has been happening for the last 30 years? No. The facts regarding the genocide are very clear, at least for those who are defending the memory. The chronology is known, the development, everything is clear. We know what the perpetrators did, but for all those people who are working on this, when we add the racist ideology, we are kind of vague. So we know and we don't know at the same time. We talk about it, but not deeply. And the reason is, for myself, racism brings about passionate debate, and that has always been the case when we look at the history of racism throughout the world. Ethnic and racial discriminations are the biggest issue of our times. This is a current issue. A few years back, the asylum requests were granted on the basis of political bias, and it is very clear today that some groups flee because of who they are. So this is a debate. The debate on racism is so modern that everybody has their little contribution. Oh, racism is because of this or that. And they do not even look at the fact that scientists have conducted research and have conclusions that to be taken into account. And when I talk about scientists, I'm talking about anthropology, sociology, psychology. So is it only the experts who can talk about racism? No. But what I would like to point out is that this area regarding race, ethnicity, identity has been depoliticized, and everybody is like, I think this. And this makes it very difficult in our fight against hate speech, against denialism, because either we don't fight enough or we don't go too far in our fight. The anti-Tutsi ideology before the genocide, during the genocide, and after the genocide is anchored in what we call negrophobia. And this also goes in line with self-loathing, self-hatred, and this has been hammered into Africans, this colonial ideology regarding race. Negrophobia is the fact of putting aside people who are black from the human collective by turning them into animals. It's a construction, a violent construction, a definitive construction, in order to justify the exploitation of land, the exploitation of people, and up to slavery, women who were killed so that other people, white people, could live better. Another example, France participated in the construction of the African as a strange race. Today, people like to say that, oh, France has done mistakes, we would like to come back to the old France, So it almost comes out like they are trying to demystify or diminish a particular race, and in this case, the black race. There was a lot of interesting text that created the African, but based on the point of view of the white people. As black people are primitive, they need civilization, they need to be civilized. The African have been studied, measured, exploited around these conclusions. And the conclusion is the African is not an individual who's fully formed. So what happened? The African was exposed in Europe, in zoos, and as an anecdote, up until 2000, there were human zoos in Europe. And then a few years back, we had Nazism, Nazis, and this brought about something. It was a shock for Europe. So barbaric actions do not only concern other people, but also concerns white people. No human beings were mistreated, excluded. But they were talking about the victims of Nazis, but not the African victims. And anti-Tutsi, so that you understand the link, it's all of this. It's negrophobia and the import of the anti-Semite ideology in Africa through colonialism. This is the origin of denialism. It's exclusion without any judgment. After the Second World War, and given the horrors of Shoah, that humanitarians really dismissed for quite some number of years. You know, though some people say some genocides are respected, others are not, but that is not always the case. After Shoah, after the Holocaust, the victims were not heard. They were despised, they were laughed at. So after the horrors of the Second World War, there was some sort of gaslighting which prevents us until today to deal with all these genocides in a more comprehensive way. There was an moral anti-racism, sorry. Never again. This is a slogan, but at the same time it's some sort of political fraud, because the person who says never again, who is usually somebody from the West, pronounces these words to position themselves as somebody who is superior, acceptable, without actually doing anything in recognizing those actions or the actions of his countries. So the Europeans woke up after the Second World War and decided to ignore this topic. No more responsibilities in the genocides and the colonies, where there are countries where the populations were eradicated. No responsibilities in the genocide of the Herald and Damas. Only misunderstandings, we didn't know, it was another time. So there are no more responsibilities, and not only are there no responsibilities, they kind of position themselves as the ones who spearhead the just, the acceptable. So they're actually replicating what they did during colonialism, because Africans are considered as not advanced enough to be able to do it themselves. Hence, if we accept that the memory of genocide or a crime against humanity is deformed, we are actually preparing the ground for our history to be dismissed. Anti-Tutsi today is based in, we cannot be understood if we don't understood negrophobia, accountability. Since the Golden Ages, the Europeans were fantasizing about Africa as a paradise, with people with a better skin, people who are more evolved than Africans. And very soon after that, the Africans were divided in different races. We were divided between actual black people and not really black people. This was said in better words, of course, with better proper words which are more politically correct. Jean-Pierre Chrétien said this very well. There were some doubtful generalities. They were saying about our populations of the Great Lakes region that those people are less known than Negroes because slavery was not done there as it was done in other areas. The Kaf, which are a sort of population, a race which was closer to the white people, so the link that was created between the Negro who accepts slavery and the one that does not accept slavery is very important for us to understand today's struggle. When the Europeans were faced by populations that were never subjected to slavery, they felt like they were in a superior position and that West Africans were prone to go into slavery. In his essay regarding inequalities among the human races, he actually talks about the reason why there are some populations who are closer to white people were implanted in some areas of Africa. So there was a negative valorization of some group of black people compared to others, because they did not understand how some people refused slavery. Now, this ideology is still present in Europe. It's still the case, but with better social codes. We have heard our African civilizations being, classified like this or like that. Those ones work more. Those ones don't work that much. In this country, they are organized. In the other, they're not. It's all politically correct, but obviously nobody reminds anyone why some countries cannot be organized because generations of intellectual and political leaders were massacres. Now, today, the hatred that we experience from today's deniers, we're not talking about Human Rights Watch or other, but without the denialism that comes from those associations, organizations, etc., we could win against denialism. The hatred that we experience from the denialists, the European denialists, is the same as those the racism that prevailed previously during the slavery period. You cannot fight against the denialism if you do not acknowledge this. Thank you very much. Thank you for this link between racism and denialism. Helen, you conduct research on survivors and victims. Can you tell us a little bit more regarding the significant conclusions you have? Thank you for the floor. Hello, everyone, and thank you. I would like to thank the Gisozi Memorial for the invitation. So, when Boliana invited me to this round table, I wished to share with you a small part of a research that I carried out in regards to a sort of archaeology of denialism. I'm a historian. I worked at the National Center of Scientific Research in France, and in my opinion, denialism texts, everything that has been produced by deniers, are sources, and I believe they should be treated as such in order to understand how this denialism against Tutsi came about following the genocide. So I would like to start by saying that denialism does not only come from perverse intellectualism, but as it was said by the minister, denialism can also be a political objective that was spearheaded by the main organizers of the genocide. Now, from their Zaire camps or from other countries, the bigwigs of the interim government produced literature that exonerated them from all responsibilities when the international criminal justice system was actually creating its prosecution strategy. So what they were trying to do was to say that there was no genocide in Rwanda. And in addition to this, they are adding political demands. If you look at the signatories of this manifesto, they wanted to present themselves to the world as legitimate stakeholders and legitimate representatives of the Hutu people who were in Tanzania and other refugee camps. Now, under this apparent respectability, there was a hidden agenda, because at that time the defeat they did not see the defeat, yes, and the genocidaires only saw the retreat, only saw the fact of going to Congo as a strategic retreat, and they pursued their military training, and their objective was to come back to Rwanda and finish the work that had started. So genocide denialism is a political discourse that aims at putting forward criminal demands. Now, if you will say that it's not surprising that genocide denialism is something that is put forward by genocidaires. Yes, but if we put these documents as just simple ramblings, it would be a mistake. If you read these documents, you will see that they remind us of other texts, other documents produced by other authors who did not have to face prosecutors and judges from the ICTR. So the people who created this denialism has not changed since 94-96, and this is why I talk about the archaeology of the denialism discourse. So today, these documents that were elaborated in the refugee camps are actually ideological support for the people who believe in that. From 1995, Belgian lawyers made contact with the members of the interim government to elaborate a first strategy for their defense, and this was in the context of the creation of the ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. The Jean Kambanda followed what his lawyers said. And and this is a quote: in order to create the ICTR, a document was created which was called the vademecum of the people who will be prosecuted by the ICTR. And there were, concerning this last point, the idea was to deny everything, including the genocide and the massacres themselves. End of quote. And this was respected by everyone. So in this document, I extracted 3 points that show how a discourse on denialism is born. So in these manifestos, in these documents, are signed by high-ranking political and military people. The first text was drafted by Colonel Theoneste Bagosora. It was published on October 30th, 1995, from Cameroon, where he was exiled, and a few months before he was arrested. The second document, which is also very interesting, which is part of this archaeology of denialism, has an interesting title. This document is called "The Security Council of the United Nations has been misled regarding the genocide against the Tutsi." And this document is from June 1996 and from a political organization that brings together high-ranking members and perpetrators of the genocide, among which Colonel Theoneste Bagosora, the creator of CDR, Jean Bosco Baragouiza, Laurent Baragouiza, who participated massively in the genocide. In this document, the signatories contest all the arguments of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of the United Nations. They saying that they accepted the realities of the genocide when that was not the case. The authors stipulate that the massacres can only be attributed to the Rwandan Patriotic Front. So you see, the responsibilities are being diverted. The third document is a document that I found very interesting, difficult to read, but very interesting. It's a document from Mathieu Ngirumhatse, PhD in law and part of the Amarendi political party. And this document was published in 1996. There are no dates on this document, but I think we can place it around 1996. Mathieu Ngirumhatse was arrested in Mali in June 1998, so he drafted this before he was arrested. He was arrested and sentenced by judges of the ICTR, and he is still in prison currently in Senegal. So I cannot go deeply into these documents, but I'm going to try and summarize them. The standard operating procedure of denialism in all these 3 documents is the theory is, on the one hand, this theory of double genocide. But that is not necessarily the case in these 3 documents. Why? There is a more radical approach in these 3 documents. We can find actually these ideas in the book by Judy Rever, and some of these documents were quoted in other books. These documents affirm that the genocide never existed. The only genocide, according to them, is the genocide against the Hutu that was committed by the RPF. I'm not going to to go too much into this between and making a link between these old documents and what has been more recently. You know, there are some who think that Interahamwe militias were agents of the RPF who were infiltrated in Rwanda, and this idea was mentioned in 1996, and Judith Rever talks about this as if it's something new. No, this is something that had already been put forward in the 1990s. What is important here to underline is that beyond denialism, which can be attributed to intellectual perversity, you know, it's not, the issue is not that, it's the political support that they gain, the political support that the people who are responsible for the genocide actually got at that point. So I think that there is moral and political responsibility that should be attributed to the authors of these documents. Thank you, Helen. We're talking about denialism. I would like to give the floor to Eugène. We talked about denialism after the genocide. The minister mentioned that even before the genocide there was denialism. The floor is yours. Thank you, Basil. Ladies and gentlemen, hi. Good afternoon. I am very grateful for Dr. Helen Dumas, who, without consulting us, without consulting each other, we actually are going to talk about the same thing. This shows the importance of this subject that brings us here together, which is denialism. Denialism from the lens of a historian and denialism from a lawyer, a jurist, and I think we can complete each other. I think I'm going to try and follow a chronological order to show that what we have today in terms of denialism in Europe is not something that just came all of a sudden. There are origins, chronology. We can look at this as a continuity of something that has been there for some time. Now, I'm going to place myself now following the genocide, when the genocide was stopped. What happened? We saw that this denialism started to take root. After the defeat of the genocidaires, there was an expansion of the genocide ideology in the region, and this expansion also was the case in Europe. Denying genocide became for the genocidaires as an option for the extermination of the Tutsi. Once the ex-FAR were defeated, as well as the political class, hundreds of thousands of civilians were encouraged to leave and exile themselves in the former Zaire and other neighboring countries, mainly Burundi and Tanzania. The ex-FAR, so the Rwandan members of the former Rwandan army, created an interim government, and the political members of the government also established themselves in those camps. So those army, civilian and military army organized themselves and also organize armed forces who were well equipped. They mixed the army and the gendarmerie in order to create one structure, and this structure was born in the camp of Mugunga around between 94 and 96. Everyone who had then in the army integrated this new structure under the command of General Major Augustin Bizimungu and his deputy Brigadier General Gratien Kabirigi.
Along with Major Mudachumura Sylvestre, Major Mulikina, Colonel Nyirena Gabo Aloise, and Colonel Tarsis Renzaho. This military structure was supported by a political structure, the RDR, the Rassemblement pour le Retour des Réfugiés et Démocratie au Rwanda. This was supposed to be a political infrastructure which was actually working along with the military structure, and they both coordinated this denialism process to basically, finish up the work between brackets. And they were operating out of the Mugunga refugee camp. Now, following that, they received the support of the ex-FAR, who were demanding for the demission of the government in exile. And that was the government of Sindi Kubwabo, which was still in place. So the RDR was created, replaced that government in exile. Now, why am I saying all this? It is because the military and political structures, once vanquished and dismantled, will basically move to Europe. The RDR at the time already had representatives in the Netherlands, with Victoire Ingabire, who was in the Netherlands, and she joined the RDR in 1997, before taking the leadership of the movement in 2000. And we have people who had been suspected of genocide against the Tutsis, who joined the movement. So the RDR becomes very active in the camps, and it mobilizes funds. It is on the political and diplomatic scene, on the international scene, using denialism as an argumentative. So we have the expansion of the camps. We have representatives in Germany, because the RDR is actually actively recruiting. We have Ignace Murwana Shaka and Audence Musoni, who become leaders of the FDLR in France. There's Harushimana, who's the executive secretary in Mozambique. In Mozambique, we have other people, and we have Ruth Urnana in the United States, with Higiro, Félicien Riamirois, who is also in the movement. And both of them actually have the US citizenship. In Canada, we have De Couzet, who's the spokesperson, and in France, Abayizi Gira, who is also the spokesperson for the movement. So political and military structures, following the dismantling of the camps and of the voluntary repatriation of the refugees, has led to a continuation of the movement in Belgium, in France, in the Netherlands, in Spain, in Italy, in Sweden. And I will actually try and move faster here. Europe basically becomes a land of welcoming all those genocide deniers, and particularly France and Belgium, for historical reasons, which I will not have the time to develop here. Although we all know that France was actually working with the genocidal government at the time. And we see other associations, NGOs, which are very active in creating structures to welcome those who left the camps, are suspected of genocide, or ideologists of denialism, and who moved to Europe. And this leads me to the last part of my remarks. Today, we have those who initiated this denialism process, who set up a new ideology that suggests there was a double genocide. And this is obviously something that actually came out of nowhere and which does not have any foundation, because the facts are there, the evidence is there, and the perpetrators are known. And those who reject or deny the genocide against the Tutsi basically follow the same scenario, the one that we actually basically had in recognizing the genocide against the Tutsi. And they say that the genocide against the Hutus was prepared, it was executed as well. We have victims, we have survivors of the Hutu genocide. And they say that those who deny the genocide against the Hutus are genocide deniers. So we basically have a conversion of the actual denialism into a form that is based on the so-called double genocide theory. Now, in Belgium, we have Jumbo News as a media that uses this argument to empty the genocide against the Tutsi of its substance. And right now, they're actually fighting for the recognition of the genocide against the so-called genocide against the Hutus. Now, Dr. Helen did speak about the literature. And there's an abundant literature proving the existence of denialism, of this conspiracy theory. Nyiragabo speaks about the genocide of refugees. We have Major Mpiranya, who actually died, who published a book. Jean Kambanda did publish a couple of books. The first one in the Interahamwe of the RPF, prefaced by Patrice Mbeka, who's also a genocide denier of Congolese citizenship. And they actually publish in a very reputable editing company, publishing company. We have Nahimana Ferdinand, who published 2 works, Rwanda, the Hutu elite accused, and then another one titled The Wrong Turns, then Karamera publishing the Lost Paradise, Aimé Baragwiza, who died, but who had published a book titled Is Hutu's Blood Red as well. So there's a lot we can say about this. But in any case, we do know that there's a source of the denialism that we see today. And this link was never broken. And the deniers of 59, 63, 64, 1990, where are they? They're in Belgium. They're in France. There's André Sebatoine, who was a minister in the Kaibanda's government. He actually still lives. There's Shingiro Mbonyumutwa, who passed on. But his children, his sons, are those who actually started the Jumbo News media. And if denialism, the denialism that actually was born in the refugee camps, it appears clearly that the denialism speech did not lose anything of that of the 1960s. Thank you very much, Dr. Diogène. You said it rightly. They do write and publish, and this is very important. Mr. Richard, you are a lawyer. You live in the world of the justice system, and many people would actually think that this is a just world. But unfortunately, this world did not escape this ideology of denialism. So maybe you could actually take the floor. Thank you, Basile. I would also wish to thank the organizers of this roundtable, and thank you for your presence. I am honored to take part in this debate, and particularly on such an important topic on the occasion of the 30th commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsis. Especially given this debate is actually organized in a very symbolic place, the Genocide Memorial of Gisozi. As you've just said, Basile, unfortunately, the world of the justice system does not escape denialism. And this is a sad truth, because in this world, the denialism was actually trying to found itself on one of the most important premises of the legal system around the world, which is the freedom of speech. The knowledge about the genocide against the Tutsi was actually becoming known. From the very beginnings, we actually come today to conspiracy theories which cannot be tolerated. And as was indicated, the authors, the perpetrators, basically try and hide their crimes. This is exactly what happened with the Holocaust. And this, as was mentioned by Hélène Dumas and Dr. Bideri, denialism, we actually find traces of denialism since 1995. And I'm not going to come back to the vademecum. I'm talking about written texts which were actually used at the ICTR. And Hélène Dumas did speak of the vademecum, and the person who seems to be the source of this document, and unfortunately this is a colleague, a lawyer, at least, you know, based on the information that we have. So Jean Kambanda provides quite a number of details about its content and preparation, and provides the name of the person who did prepare the line of defense that was used by, that consisted in actually denying everything. So it was Johan Shields, a Belgian lawyer who is very well known. He worked for Habyarimana while Habyarimana was still president of the Republic, and his mission initially was actually to help Habyarimana, repair his image before the king of Belgium. And particularly following the death of King Baudouin. So Johan Shields did continue providing his services to the Kambanda government, and he actually became a lawyer for the defense, and particularly for Jean-Paul Akayezu. So this strategy was actually put forward with a number of lawyers, foreign lawyers, and it actually flourished before the ICTR, And up until 2006, almost all the accused were supporting the fact that there was no genocide in Rwanda, and were forcing the prosecutor to basically prove the existence of a genocide against the Tutsi. This became an untenable situation. And during the Karemera trial, there was a procedure that was instituted called jugement de constat, which allowed the tribunal to make a historical judgment to affirm that the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994 was a fact that should not be demonstrated anymore. And following that, the genocide deniers adopted, and up to this day, and of course they do not continue using this mass denial, at least before the European jurisdictions. But the second argument that is being developed today is the theory of spontaneous massacres that were triggered by the crash of Habyarimana's plane. And they try to explain that the genocide was not prepared, and that somehow a population that somehow became crazy decided to kill their neighbors. And these are people who basically wish to exploit and believe these racist theories that basically state that Africans are savages and that they engage into cyclic and regular killings. And there's a professor of African Studies at the University of Edinburgh, if not mistaken, who also got involved in this. So Stephen Smith was a former journalist who worked for Libération and Le Monde, and he was responsible for drafting papers on Africa. And he wrote a work titled Négrologie, pourquoi l'Afrique se meurt, which suggests that Africa is full of people that somehow live between savage wars amongst themselves, and in reality the historical responsibility of Western nations should be limited. And he actually tries to explain what happened in Rwanda, and according to him, Rwandans actually killed each other, and that the Hutus were actually taken by anger after the killing of their head of state, killed by the RPF, and decided to kill the Tutsis. And according to him, the crash of Habyarimana's plane was actually the cause of the genocide. And they actually focused on the investigation regarding the crash, which the theory was supported by the Judge Bruguière, and this is. This is very sad. And now, this order was actually validated in 2014, following Judge Trevidic, who replaced Bruguière. Now, Stephen Smith did not give up on this theory. Just 4 months ago, in Paris, he came to testify for Munyemana, a medical doctor who was actually condemned to 24 years of prison, and he will be there will be a retrial in September. And I actually asked at the tribunal how a man as intelligent as he is can think that Africans who he believes to be savages that actually eat each other, believe that he can actually provide a a testimony before the judge. And he argued that his book was actually a success. And I actually responded that the popularity of a book or the success of a book does not actually determine whether the book was factual or not. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, these are the kinds of witnesses or experts that we have to face during various trials in Europe. Another denial theory is that of the double genocide, and my colleagues did speak about it. And as they indicated, this is not recent. It actually appears in some of the texts. And I will give you an example. There's Hervé de Guine, who actually came as a witness before the French justice system, where he provided ridiculous examples, saying that he actually saw RPF soldiers cleaning up trucks full of blood, And another person that is well known, called Paul Rusesabagina, who also intervenes as a witness. And the example I will give you is about his intervention in the British press, which was published in 2015, regarding people called Charles Munyaneza, Emmanuel Nziryayo, and many others. And Rusesabagina intervened at one of the trials, and he actually accused the government of Rwanda of all possible crimes, and he was so excessive that the judge had to write in his judgment that Paul Rusesabagina is so excessive in his accusations against the government of Rwanda that it has become impossible to believe in what he says. The last theory that I would wish to share with you, and that we see in some of these trials, is that pertaining to conspiracy theories. And it is a theory that wants you to believe that it is impossible to imagine the existence of a far-right African group that would prepare the extermination of a part of the population. And these conspiracy theorists suggest that there was a plan to basically put, or rather establish into power the RPF, so that they could rule over Rwanda and give access to the Western world to the mineral resources in the DRC. Now, according to another author, the international law is basically, and here I'm talking about William Black, he doesn't speak about the genocide. And according to him, what happened in Rwanda is a total war where all means necessary were used to actually kill the people, the Hutu people. And according to him, the ultimate objective was actually to take ownership of the resources in the DRC. And according to him, the idea was actually for the US to use the RPF to gain access to the resources in the Congo. And since then, I haven't heard from him in a long time, and particularly regarding the trials trying cases of genocide against the Tutsis. But almost systematically, the defense of the accused in all the trials that I took part in tried to bring back the debate around the theory of the double genocide or the theory of the ultimate goal, which would be to actually gain access to the riches of Congo. And unfortunately, in regards to the latter, I believe we will still hear about this for a very long time. Johan Stunen, who was ambassador of Belgium to Rwanda at the very beginning of the genocide, states that or has had an impact on the opinion. Indeed, for many years now, the former ambassador has forged himself a reputation through multiple statements where he basically uses different arguments to say that we should actually be wary of the official discourse because there's a hidden agenda. Now, as many other conspiracy theorists, he does not offer any evidence in regards to these allegations, and he just says that there's a lot of questions that have not been answered yet. Now, he was a witness in 2 trials in France, and he kept his arguments, saying that there's an existence of a Machiavellic plan that would have been planned for before the genocide to basically take over Congo, the DRC. And this former diplomat goes through various media and shares his conspiracy theories along with other conspiracy theories. Now, among other theories, they say that basically, and I will refer to the telex that you're probably aware about, which was addressed on in March 1992, which said, and that was in 1992, which indicates that from a viable source, we've received a list of secret squads in charge of killing Tutsi extremists. And this is actually a telex that was sent to Belgium. That was in 1992. But today he actually says something totally different earlier. It is part of the genocide and constitutes a continuation of the genocide. And to take the example of the Shoah, the denialism actually still exists in different forms 79 after the Holocaust, 79 years after the Holocaust. And we have to understand that this is a fight that we will be forced to actually lead for a very long time. And the new generation must get interested in fighting denialism. And today we have to recognize that thanks to those who fought denialism against the Holocaust, seldom found in the public, and they do not express themselves publicly. And now, without trying to compete about, genocides, it is important to understand that denialism must be fought by all means necessary.
I
think the public will have its opportunity to ask questions.
Guys, and based on what Hélène said early, she said that the denial speeches are political. So we can ask ourselves, is there a difference between the academic genocide denial? Do we find the techniques, the writing techniques in academic that everyone cannot be easy to discover? While you present, you can even reflect on that.
Sure. Thank you. So I will switch to English so we have a little bit more balance. And there are more headsets if needed here. I would first like to thank Aegis Trust, and I think it's also to reiterate, it's a very symbolic moment to be here. So I'm very happy to be here today to commemorate and also to pay honor to the genocide survivors. Indeed, when it comes to academia, it's very important to look at the way that genocide denial is part of a type of discourse that is more maybe implicit rather than explicit. Although there are theories that we know that are quite common, when it comes to academia, it could be a little more dubious or more subtle, but it's still as important and maybe even more, because subconsciously we do end up internalizing them without really noticing them. So I'm going to first quickly just reiterate what denialism is, because I think that in terms of the definition itself, we tend to think that maybe there are some theories that define genocide denial, and the primary one is, like my co-panelist said, is the direct denial of genocide, which means no genocide has happened in 1994. But of course, that's not the only way to deny genocide. So I would say that overall, denialism is the practice and promotion of theories of genocide denial. So it's a little more broad even today than it used to be. Its primary goal is to create collective doubt. So some people would say it's like selling doubt. So it creates collective doubt within the society itself, where we start questioning everything. And this again goes back to the notion of negrophobia, especially when it comes to the history of certain people. So it's not based on science or facts or history, but rather intended to create self-doubt, which eventually leads to self-hate and hate of others, and ultimately builds into a hate ideology or a hate system of ideas. So I think it's very important to link, like my co-panelists did here, genocide denial and hate ideology, or denialist ideology and hate ideology. So denialism is a system of thought put into words or discourse, which comprises a set of beliefs that include all the theories that you know. So as a discourse analyst, I focus on how the discourse itself is going to unfold. So it's not just about the meaning itself, but about ways that we get to that specific denialist discourse. So I'm just going to cite a few theories that you're all familiar with. So like I said, there's the direct denial of genocide. There's also calling what happened in '94 a civil war rather than a genocide. It's saying that it wasn't genocide because it wasn't planned, because it was a spontaneous reaction to the assassination of Habyarimana. Then we have the mirror accusation, or reversing the roles between victim and perpetrator, like reversing responsibility in the downing of the plane on April 6th, so accusing the RPF. It is accusing the victim of having started or provoked its own extermination by having the original intention to commit genocide against the perpetrator group. So back in the 90s, this is what we used to say, beware, because they're trying to commit genocide against us, therefore we need to prepare. And this is how genocide is going to be planned. Then there's the double genocide theory that we heard about, or saying that the victim group has committed a second genocide of the perpetrator group by revenge, or as part of an ancestral continuous inter-ethnic hate. Again, it's a way of minimizing genocide itself. There's also questioning the number of victims to downplay the extent of the tragedy. it's considering the genocide as an insignificant anecdotal event. And I'm talking specifically about the genocide against the Tutsi, or it's what Madeleine Mukamabano called une parenthèse de l'histoire. So it's when we kind of tend to kind of brush it aside as if it was very anecdotal and not that important. So that's another form of denialism. So not thinking about the historical roots of the genocide and how we got there. There's also creating ambiguity in the naming of the targeted group. So this is something that keeps coming back. We had it in the social media recently where people are not actually naming it as it was named by the UN resolution itself, which is genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Some of the ways to do that is calling it the Rwandan genocide, which creates this ambiguity of who the target group was. Or it's persistently emphasizing that members of the perpetrator group were also killed. So when people say, you know, the Tutsi were not the only one who got killed, but that's really misunderstanding the whole idea of what genocide is, which is that there is an identified targeted group. And so this last one actually blurs the line between perpetrator and victim. So now just quickly, what is academia? Because we tend to sometimes think Charles Nana is an academic. Well, he's not really an academic. I think the way that we define academia is, maybe Stephen Smith is a good example, who used to be a journalist and who is now affiliated to university, carrying out research and teaching. So my research is mainly focusing on people who have, I would say, impact on the students that they teach to, and the affiliations that they get. Why? Because it gives them a type of legitimacy. Charles Nana is not legitimate necessarily until he publishes with the university press. So it's another level, I would say, of authority. So academia is the part of society, especially universities, that is connected with studying and thinking, or the activity or job of studying. Is the environment or community concerned with the pursuit of research, education, and scholarship? So I'm really interested in the genocide denialists who are affiliated with universities, also because I always say that their job is just to think all day. So thinking in terms of how ideology can be born in those areas, in that environment of where we tend to think and question everything, I think conspiracy theories can be very easily born in academia, which is quite troubling. Now, what is an ideology, or what is ideology? It is a system of ideas. So it has a systemic quality. It's not just one person thinking it, it's when a whole entire society starts believing in that set of beliefs. So it could also be thought as a political campaign, which incites racial or ethnic violence against a targeted group when it comes to genocide ideology itself. So just quickly, a few things about discourse. Why is it even important when we hear people saying the narrative, especially the mainstream narrative today in the social media or in the media, the conventional media? Well, it's because ways of thinking or ways of talking produce and reproduce ways of thinking. If we keep repeating the same formula, the same conspiracy theories over and over again, people start to believe them, people start to repeat them. So we start internalizing, not just the perpetrator of that discourse or the author of the discourse, but also the victim of that discourse. So we indirectly or subconsciously start to internalize them. So let's say that discourses are conventional ways of talking that create and perpetuate systems of ideology, which is very important because when we think about how genocide was planned and when we think about hate media, we understand how it becomes some kind of brainwashing device or tool. Meaning is socially constructed and jointly produced. So where in one specific context we can say that the interpretation of this is that, but in another context it could be something else. So it's really socially constructed. Now, it's important to understand that every linguistic choice is strategic. I'm saying it this way, I could say it in another way. I could put my object at the beginning of the sentence. I'm not giving the same emphasis on what I'm saying. So it's very important to understand that there are connotations to words, and these choices, these word choices, are strategic. They're not just random. And so now discourse is shaped by the limitations and possibilities of its media. So the media is going to convey this kind of discourse. Without the media, if the media is limited or if the media is directed, then we are limited by how much we can say or the type of discourse that we can convey. And so media is going to shape discourse, and discourse is going to shape media. Now academia is kind of like the next level of increased or enhanced defined ideology that can be found. Now denialism is a speech act, and as such denialist discourse has a performative value. This is something that the minister said earlier. There are so many different forms of denialism, and it's very important to understand that when we deny, we're actually performing the denial of humanity or denial of existence, and therefore we're indirectly inciting hate and hate violence. I am going to specifically focus on a few examples of academics who are either explicit denialists or who are using somewhat of a more subtle form of denialism. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. When we look at the discourse of an academic, we don't just pick one text. It could be, one text could be okay, another one not. So we're looking at their entire work. We're looking at their history, so how they, started. I think the example of Stephen Smith was actually interesting because he used to report on the genocide and used to kind of stick to the truth more or less, but then suddenly started to publish books like Négrologie and etc. So we have a few names here. Philippe Rentiens, who is the big name that everybody has been using for a very long time because he was kind of the only expert. This notion of expert could be linked to having the monopoly of knowledge. Sometimes it could be one single person who is there. But of course it's attached to the value of having Western experts coming to, again, explore, discover Africa. So a lot of these people actually, in this case, all the ones I'm going to quote are from the Western world. They're all white men. So Philippe Rentiens, Jason Stearns, Howard French, Tim Longman, Stephen Smith, Alan Stam are just some of the examples, and others. So they practice denialism both implicitly and explicitly. Their socio-professional and intellectual authority acquired over the years thanks to their academic publications and their status as members of the academic network legitimize their denialist discourse, which the media then relay without verification of the facts or respect the research ethics. So because we live also in the digital age, there is less and less verification about the research ethics of a particular scholar, so people tend to kind of say anything they want to say as long as they have that authority as an expert, as an academic. And so another aspect that is interesting is the connection between them. So you can be actually not knowing each other, but just the fact of being an academic gives you the status of some type of like elite network. So if I review your work and you're another academic, it gives me status, it gives you status. So it becomes almost like a very elitist type of denialist discourse. All right, so I know time is running. So just want to give you some examples. So I would say the most common denialist discourse in academia is really blurring the line between perpetrator and victim. Because the idea is to nuance the history, is to say, well, me, I know, because if I look at the history of this area, this happened in the past, so that means that maybe this is why something else happened. So once you start kind of trying to give a scientific attachment to your story, it becomes quite dangerous because then we start nuancing, yeah, but maybe in the past the perpetrator was a victim and so on. And in the case of the genocide against the Tutsi, it's quite typical. We don't do it with the Holocaust. I mean, it has been done, but when it comes to the genocide against the Tutsi, it continues being done. And so I would summarize it in this sentence. This is more or less what academics do in a subtle way. So I'm quoting an imaginary sentence here. So basically, the RPF has stopped the genocide. However, it has committed atrocities and another genocide and is discriminating and oppressing the other group through tyranny. So it's really the double genocide theory. However, some of the scholars, like Chrétiens, are going to go back into history and are going to say, but this is all linked to the thirst for power by the RPF because it's a conspiracy theory that was there during the Hamitic myth and the pre-colonial justifications to explore the area, to define hierarchies of real and fake blacks or false blacks. And so one way that they do also is changing connotation. So I'm going to give you an example by Jason Stearns in 2010. So often, also, I just want to remind that ideology doesn't stop at a border. So we cannot kind of say that Rwanda is isolated from Burundi, from the Congo, because the ideology has been there in the region for a long time, which is linked to colonialism. And that would be the same for West Africa, et cetera, Southern Africa. So in 2010, he published a title called Bombshell UN Report Leaked, Crimes of Genocide Against Hutu in Congo. So this is basically, he's saying there's a leak by the mapping report, and I have the breaking news, and this is what I am gonna say about this leak, or about this mapping report. And so he says a few things, but this is the main thing that he says. Here, I will speak about the most controversial claim. So you notice here that he's a scholar, but he's already attaching emotions to what he's saying. So he defines it as controversial. He's not just stating facts. And that claim is the massacres carried out by the Rwandan army, together with the AFDL rebellion led by Laurent Kabila, against the Hutu refugees in 1996-1997. And he kind of concludes his article by saying, the striking conclusions is that the crimes committed by the RPA against Hutu refugee and Congolese Hutu could constitute a crime of genocide. This will be a bombshell for Paul Kagame's government, which prides itself of having brought an end to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi and have built their reputation and their appeal to donors on their promotion of post-genocide reconciliation. This report will rock the internet for months and years to come. Its political importance is hard to overstate. There are so many things. I could probably spend hours with students on this little paragraph, but he doesn't simply state there's a claim that the RPF committed massacres. He adds a lot of the personal analysis to that. Basically, when he says Paul Kagame's government, he could have called it something else, but he's really isolating here Paul Kagame as a figure to kind of back these conspiracy theories. Then he says, which prides itself of having brought an end. He could have said, which brought an end, so which prides itself. There's almost this notion that he's kind of denying that they stopped the genocide, and have built their reputation and their appeal to donors. This is something that has been kind of going on and on and on. And of course, someone like Jason Stearns has been repeating this for 15 years. So this was 2010. In 2024, he's still saying the same things over and over again, using the same phrases or with some synonyms, and always calling for sanctions. He's not necessarily using the word sanction, but he's implying it, which is why this is how we can see the subtle form of denialism. Just to end, I don't even know how much time I took already. So Philippe Chrétien, I wanted to just also use him a little bit as an example, as a kind of different example, although it's the same, because as you can see, Jason Stearns has used the phrase genocide against the Tutsi in 2010 already, when the resolution was a 2014 resolution. Philippe Chrétien also does the same thing, which is basically that these academics do not deny genocide, or they don't deny that a genocide took place against the Tutsi. What they do is that they start, kind of nuancing things. So Philippe Chrétien uses the same discourse, whereby on the one hand he recognizes the genocide against the Tutsi, but he seeks to revise it by minimizing it. So for example, one way he does that is that he's questioning the number of victims, as if that changes anything, you know. But he's going to say, well, you know, the official numbers are this, and the other numbers are that. And so once you start creating doubt, you're already going into denialism. Because it doesn't really matter how many. I mean, it matters to those who have lost loved ones. But it's the fact, it's the definition of genocide that matters here. So the vicious method he uses is that he persistently links the present to the past, pre-colonial, colonial, and the immediate post-colonial past to ultimately justify the extermination plan of the Tutsi population, which is where his discourse is quite problematic. Because in the end, by nuancing everything, he ends up saying, well, it's quite normal that the Tutsi were exterminated because of their history. They were oppressing before, they had this expansionist you know, ideology and so on. And therefore, this is why we got here today. And I think, of course, there are many other examples. Timothy Longman also does that. He's talking about Murambi. I'll just finish on this one. So he's talking about the public. So in the book called Memory and Justice in Post-Genocide Rwanda, he's talking about the public exhibition of the bodies at Murambi, which to him seemed particularly offensive and insensitive. So you can see here how the academic places himself, and I'm using maybe the he gender here because all of these are quite obviously white male with the particular privilege to have a voice, and he is injecting himself into the story of the genocide. So he says, I quote, "I found myself wondering about the purpose of this memorial site." So you can see how he brings everything back to how do I, as a male, white male, think about this story of Africans. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Boyan, of course, for the focus on the conflict discourse. And thank you, the other panelists as well. The public, the audience is here to share their thoughts, but the plan is this one. We'll be having a short break of 15 minutes. We have a coffee at the back, and then we'll be back for your reactions, for your questions to the panelists. So we are now going to have that break, but before the break, il y a un communiqué. Nous sommes heureux.
We are happy to announce that the movie Une et mille collines will be shown tonight at 8 p.m. on Agent TV and on national TV at 8:30 p.m. It's a movie called One of a Thousand Hills, which is a movie regarding the genocide against the Tutsi to today. So Isachu TV and national TV at 8 and 8:30.
For the reaction, for the questions, for contribution with the panelists. Thank you.
of remembrance, the light of life.
Subira munda, imitima igasubira mu bitereko. turiho ariko kandi turibuka, turiho turumwe turiyubaka.
Never died. And today, this spirit leads us into a brighter future.
Jenoside yakorewe abatutsi mu Rwanda yasize ibikomere ku mitima ya benshi, bakeneye kuruhuka intimbi baguye. Twibuke twese tubakomeza umutima. Abanyarwanda twibuke Jenoside, abacitse ku icumu ishavu ry'ibaherana, kuko hari amahirwa zanwa no kwizera. Zirikana gutera ikirenge mu cyabawe igihe bari bataratuvamo. Twibuke Jenoside yakorewe abatutsi, turushaho gufata mu guhangana n'ihungabana. Umurage wacitse ku icumu, turi kumwe mwana w'u Rwanda, humura muri wenyine. Twese dufatanirize hamwe kugira umutima wa kimuntu, n'abarya bahungabanye twirinde kubahunga, ahubwo tubahumurize, tubaremere icyizere cyo kubaho n'ejo.
Wonyine u Rwanda rugezeho, ntiwashidikanya ndabona icyizere. Imfubyi ziraseka, abapfakazi nuko, abarokotse ayo mahano bihangiye imirimo. Turangamiye ejo hazaza, amateka mabi ntakituranga. Jenoside yakorewe abatutsi, turushaho gufatana mu guhangana n'ihungabana. Umurage wacitse ku icumu, turi kumwe mwana w'u Rwanda, humura muri wenyine.
Icyizere cy'ejo hazaza kitwibagiza ibibi byose twarenze. Ubutwari, ubupfura n'urukundo biturange mu kuza ikivi cy'abacu. saba imana gukomeza u Rwanda tuzabasange tubizi
Hello. May I have your attention, please? We kindly ask all the participants, all of you, we kindly ask you, I know you are enjoying your coffee, but you can bring it with you and come back to your seats, please. And for those who are at the back, kindly come back. We are about to start our next session. The next session is about to start. We kindly request everyone who is outside to come back. The protocol team kindly help us to bring people back to their seats. We are about to start. We are kindly again request all the participants who currently enjoying their coffee to bring their cups with them and go back to their seats. We are about to start our next session. I'm still seeing people at the back. You can bring your cup of coffee with you. Just grab it with you and come back to the seat that you So as we prepare to start our next session, I would like to encourage your participation. I know the panelists have talked a lot, but this is your time to engage with them. So we'll open the session. We'll be having the microphones. There is a team with the microphones. So I would like to encourage you to participate in the next interactive session. So as I mentioned, as we enter into the next session, we would like to encourage you to participate. If you have questions, if you have comments on what the panelists have already said, this is your time. You will raise your hand, and the people at the back will give you the microphone. And of course, introduce yourself, the name, and then your question or your comment. You can directly ask the question to one of the panelists from their presentation, or it could be a general question for everyone. So we look out to guide to one of the panelists. So the floor is yours. The floor is for the audience.
Non.
I believe Helen would like to say a few words. Yes, I'm sorry. This is not very conventional, but the first question is always very hard to ask. I would like to say that despite everything that has been said, we should understand that not all is actually as grim as it appears to be, and we should recognize some of the progress that has been made in terms of fighting denialism vis-à-vis the genocide against the Tutsis. And I'm actually speaking for the case of France, and there has been some progress in the last few years. in regards to the cultural fight, that is the marginalization of the denialist speech in the media, in the academia, and in tribunals. And I'd like to share an example. Thanks to the solidarity of our historian colleagues, Jaji River could not publish her book at a very reputable publishing company in France. And the book that was actually published in English could not be edited thanks to the mobilization of historians who were very brave, as well as that of the head of that publishing company. And at the same time, having testified in two courts in France and in Belgium, there is a huge difference in the attitude and the comments of the defense lawyers. And what I've seen in Belgium I've actually never heard in the defense lawyers' works. And I actually met a lawyer called Maître Jean Flamme, who always puts forward crazy theories, and he says that there has been 4 genocides, and he pretends that the Interahamwe were actually infiltrated agents working on behalf of the RPF. So there has been progress, and I think it's important that we recognize those as well. And this is a fight that must go on, and this fight has actually borne fruit. And it's important to say so. Thank you very much, Helen. So we'll first begin with 5 questions for the first set of questions. We have 1 over there, 1 here, and those are 3. Right across you, just in front of you. Thank you very much.
Is Alexandria. I was born the year of the genocide, and I learned a lot about what happened the year I was born. Maybe it's because I am Canadian and because of Romeo Dallaire's involvement in the genocide and his leadership with the UN. I learned a lot today. So I really appreciate all of you coming out and explaining to us about denialism. There was so much terminology that I learned, and I can't imagine people denying what happened here, much like people deny what happened in the Holocaust. So my question is, do you think that denialism is part of the reason why there's still genocide happening today? Specifically in China with the Uyghurs, I may have pronounced that wrong, as well as with the Gaza Strip. Do you think that because there has been this history of denialism and denying the numbers, that it will continue? And if we try to educate people and fight against denialism, perhaps we could stop genocide before it starts again?
Thank you. The next one. On this first line, please.
I thank the panelists. I will speak in Kinyarwanda. Please, just 1 second, so they get their devices ready. I want to thank the panelists for their presentations. My name is Dr. Nelson Barushimana. I want to ask a question about the law and preventing and prosecuting genocide deniers. I want to know this. So what does the law say about prosecuting those who deny the genocide against Tutsis. And whether here in Rwanda or abroad, are there any people who've been prosecuted and sentenced? And my next question goes to Dr. Videri, a lawyer and a prosecutor. What does the law say, that law that prosecutes genocide deniers? And what is the message to those who still harbor that denialism, either in Rwanda or abroad, but based on the law? Thank you very much. Thank you, Nelson. There's another question on that side. It's you. Hello, my name is Chu Sanhuari. I
will ask my question in French. And when we speak about denialism, and this is basically the last step of a genocide, the last phase of a genocide, and the question is, who actually benefits from denialism? And I was wondering if, when we look at those people who publish books, write blogs, there are fundings behind all that. So my question is, who actually benefits from denialism? And we see that every day. And I wonder, why fund denialism? And is the victims of the Herero and the Nama? And again, could we envisage financial reparations? Because the survivors are actually still alive. Now, shall we have to wait up until 2050, 2070 to basically think of compensating the victims? And here I'm talking about the survivors of the genocide. Thank you. And also, if such a fund could be set up, I think it would basically help fight against denialism. When I look at Secretary Blinken and what he's said, I think, it would remove all credibility from such statements as that of Secretary Blinken. Thank you.
Dernière question. Là derrière.
Thank you. My name is Hippolyte Nhigurirwa, and I will ask my question in English. Yes, you all panelists have talked about what it is, which is, the definitions and the meaning of denialism and ideology, perfectly really laid out. And you talked about how it developed, and you talked about the fight. But I would really ask you to tap into the how to fight, because you talk about the fight that is needed, but I would like to see if you probably have done some of the development in your scholarship to do how to actually go against the denialism, or how to address it, or how to fight against it. Because the fight, yes, it's real, it's understandable, but how to go about the denialism, if there is. So it's not specific to any panelist, but it's specific to everyone in the panel.
Thank you, Hippolyte. We can take the last question. In the middle, yes. Behind the cameras, there is a gentleman with the...
Yeah, thank you. Amazina yanjye ni Nzeyimana Louis.
My name is Nzeyimana Louis. I will ask my question in Kinyarwanda. What happens is quite often during the commemoration of the genocide against Tutsis, different leaders say that they have learned a lesson from what happened in Rwanda. But the problem is this denial is still on the increase. Why is that? And we see that flourishing within the youth as well. Thank you.
Je pense qu'on on peut d'abord répondre aux questions qui ont été posées. We can just begin with the question from the lady on the other side. If Dr. Boyan, you have a contribution on that.
I was going to pass it on. I think the answer is yes. I wouldn't necessarily say in specific regions because in general they're specific to the context, but there is a lack of education on denialism and even on the genocides that occurred. I think one example I will take is in the US, not all states are teaching on the Holocaust. Yes, actually only half of the states teach on the Holocaust. My daughter is 14, so she's now studying on the genocides, but it's not her history teacher who was teaching it, and we're in Massachusetts. It was her English teacher who taught about it. So her own history teacher and English teacher didn't know anything about the genocide against the Tutsi. So I think in terms of education, there's so much to be done. And there needs to be more scholarship developed. There needs to be more young people like you and younger who should be thinking about what are the new types of material that are needed. Because I think sometimes it's a generational issue. We tend to think that we need to present long papers or we need to publish books. Nowadays, students don't learn from books necessarily. So how do we adapt it to have open source material? There's a project called Survival and Witness. If you go online, it was done by a university professor who actually created lesson plans for secondary schools to learn about the Holocaust, and it's very interactive. So you have actually survivor stories on a map. So if you click on the survivor, you know where they come from, what their story is. So it's very interactive. So I would say content and form become very important so that we can educate more. So the answer is we need more education.
Est-ce que je peux compléter en français?
D'accord.
Sorry, I'm going to complete, but in French. Okay.
I'm going to complete, but in French. Fighting against denialism is important in order to prevent genocides. When we fight against denialism, we retell the story in all its details, particularly the different steps, phases of genocide, and we know them. And they're so similar from one genocide to another. And once we know these steps, we can fight against the emergence of genocides. Let's not forget to protect the wording, the term genocide. Today we have issues. Every time we have a war with a lot of casualties, a lot of people use the word genocide. And it's not for this, so that this war comes to an end. It's a way of saying my story is more important than your story, and that is not normal, and that does not help to stop the wars. That does not change anything. We shouldn't talk about genocide in terms of your interest. Genocide is a specific crime. It is something that is linked, meaning to fighting against denialism, knowing the history in order to be able to detect, and also be careful into going into competition, memory competition. One saying that my story is more important than yours. Thank you. Jessica?
Oui, il y a une question sur, si j'ai bien compris,
There was a question on what is denialism, the definition. These words in English or in French didn't exist. Whether denialism is a new word, and the same word in French, négationnisme, didn't exist. They were created not so long ago. I think the history, etymology, which is the history of words, and Henri Rousseau is the person who coined this word. Why? Because, and this can be applied to Rwanda too, somebody talked about Philippe Chrétiens, who is revising the official discourse. But all the denialists of the Shoah, and they had actually created a magazine called the Magazine of the Revisionist School. So they were proud of being denialists. And it's in order to remove this legitimacy, to revise the history, you know, to change the facts, in order to remove any. It is the reason why this word was created, in order to be applied to those people. The denialists who present themselves as revisionists, it's a way for them to come forward as with a certain scientific legitimacy. So denialism is rooted in racism, and it's not only about purely negating the facts. We have to also remember that these words are important, and it's important to come back to the emergence of this concept of denialism, which came with the Shoah. Boyana was saying this earlier. I don't know if it was Boyana or Richard, the fact that there are denialism discourse from the extreme right. And what is interesting, we have a very troubled person who is creating confusion among all the genocides. And this is Noam Chomsky, the biggest denialist of the Shoah. Robert Faurisson was someone who defended the Khmer Rouge regime. He minimized the number of casualties between 1975 and 1979. And Noam Chomsky, in his prefaced a book on the genocide against the Tutsi. So this is like a galaxy of people, of individuals, in order to see the different types of denialism that exists. There was a question by Mr. Nelson, and there's also a question that was addressed to Monsieur Bideri. Bideri. So I'm going to try and answer to some of the questions. It is sometimes difficult to go into qualifications, qualifying crimes that are happening throughout the world. I'm saying this because mass crimes are not necessarily genocides. There are crimes against humanity that is clearly defined in international law. When there are systematic attacks, generalized against civilians, we talk about crimes against humanity. These are crimes that take place during an armed conflict. These are crimes, war crimes. And then when it comes to genocide, there is the intention to exterminate a protected group. I'm saying this because we must be honest with ourselves and today we have a qualification on what is happening in Gaza, Ukraine, in Gaza, Ukraine, China, but we have to take the time to carry out an intellectual debate that is honest on what is happening. Regarding the incrimination of denialism, my colleague Maître Gisagara will complete me, but we know that there have been considerable progress in some countries like France, and I think it's from 2017. The genocide denial, the denial of a genocide recognized by the international community, whose perpetrators were sanctioned by an international court, can be prosecuted. This is an important element. We find in other national jurisdictions, such as Luxembourg, Switzerland, and elsewhere, where hate speech is sanctioned, not specifically genocide denial, but still. So we have legal instruments that are not necessarily always used, but that exist. In Belgium, there was an attempt to have a law that punishes the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi. And I remember that the Jumbo Association did everything so that this law doesn't pass. Hence, there are people that want things to change and others that want things to remain the same. So how do you fight against denialism? I don't think there's a magic formula. I think you have to educate people. You need education. You need to publish. You need to write. You need to hold conferences so that we can minimize the number of deniers. I believe this is something that has to be done in schools. In some schools, the genocide against the Tutsi is being taught, and thanks to Helen, there is a course on the genocide against the Tutsi in Sciences Po in Paris. So there are a lot of initiatives. There's no magic bullet, but there are initiatives. In Rwanda, there is a law that sanctions the genocide ideology and adjacent crimes. There is an article that punishes the denialism, and the law is from 2018. Now, what lessons does the world, the international community, have from what happened in Rwanda? In 2005, a new concept came to light, a concept spearheaded by the United Nations. And it was called the responsibility to protect. The first mission of a government is to protect its population. But if it is the government that is killing its population, somebody else has to step in to protect this population. Hence, I think Kushner called this the right to interfere, meaning we cannot let people die because the government is saying we're a sovereign state and we have, it is our responsibility to protect. So this concept exists since 2005, but I haven't seen it being applied. So we have these nice concepts, we have these nice international law, but we don't see it being really applied. To conclude, there is a special advisor of the UN Secretary General for the prevention of genocide. think in the beginning it was somebody from South Sudan, and then Senegalese Adama Dieng, so a special advisor on the prevention of genocide. Again, nice reports, nice statements, but we've never seen this advisor advise the Secretary General for concrete actions. So we're hoping that the actions lead, the lessons lead to concrete actions. Thank you, Richard. In order to complete what has just been said by Dr. Bideri concerning the situation in France, he was explaining the situation in Rwanda. Concerning the prosecuting denialism, genocide denialism, in France there is a law. Yesterday, 2016 is the year where this law was voted, and 2017 is the year that this law came into force. It's a law that has history, because it's a law that was adopted because the justice system made it obliged the government to do something. So the Rwandan community in France got together and through their action made the government adopt this law on fighting against denialism. But we have to also say here that in the law, we do not have the wording genocide against the Tutsi. Actually, when it comes to Shoah, Shoah or Jewish is not in this law. I think it's Helen who said this, or Dr. Bideri. The law prosecutes the denial, minimization of all the genocides that have been repressed by France or international jurisdiction, and this includes the genocide against the Tutsi. So this law aimed particularly the genocide, to address the issue with the genocide against the Tutsi, but it actually concerns all the other genocides. So the sentence is 1 year imprisonment and 35,000 euros. There was also a question whether there are people who have been condemned through this law, and the answer is no. No one has been sentenced through this law. There was a trial, prosecution against a journalist, a lawyer or a journalist. Her name was Nathalie Polony, who made some statements on the radio, and she was prosecuted after a complaint by Ibuka. This is a trial that took 2 or 3 days. It was an interesting trial in which we intervened, but unfortunately she was declared not guilty. Her statements were considered. Actually, she said that in 1994, she said what was happening in Rwanda, it was bastards killing other bastards. But the French justice system did not consider this as genocide denialism. I believe that there was a question regarding the sentences for... no? Okay, so there wasn't. So that is, when it comes to fighting genocide denial, this is what we have in France. Thank you. We are 10 minutes away from the end of our conference. Oh, there is a question that was not answered regarding the reparations. I would just like to say that that there is a group of survivors who have submitted a complaint to the French government, and so it's not people who are attacked through this complaint, but rather administrative acts. So if this goes well, in the coming years, there will be some reparations. To complete this, yes, there's this ongoing process, administrative process, and next to this procedure, there are all these other trials on genocide. So currently, there are 7 people who have been tried in France, and there are only 2 which have been concluded. Simbikangwa, the Simbikangwa case, because it was the first case, we did not go until the end of the process, but he was sentenced, but this case was like a draft, so we did not go further and claim reparations. There is another case that concerns 2 former mayors of Kabarongo who were sentenced to life in prison, and the court gave damages for the suing parties. When the decision was taken according to the law, and the court attributed different sums. Some people got 80,000 euro, others 10,000 euros, another 100,000 euros, depending on the elements put forward by the lawyers. But as you know, the reparations have to be paid by the person who committed the crimes. In this case, these 2 mayors did not have the resources to pay for those damages. But we asked for the law in France to be applied, in which there is actually a fund that is used for cases where the plaintiff cannot receive compensation from the person they had a complaint against. So the law is as it is today. So you can seize this fund, and the fund does not necessarily give the exact amount. They will give 30% of the amount that was decided in courts. So 30% of the sum that was decided by the tribunal. So the people who received damages got around 3,000 euros. And I believe everyone received, people got around between 2,000 and 3,000 euros. This is the only completed trial where there were some compensation, and we will see in the coming years if the law will change. Last question. Thank you. My name is Valence Munyamugisha. In general, when we're talking about denialism, we think about 2 categories of people. This was the case in the presentations that you made. We think about those who planned the genocide and executed the genocide, because denialism is part of the genocide. And the second category of people, when it comes to denialism, it's academics, journalists, people that you meet in Europe or the US, because they have this facility to be able to publish. But we very often forget about Africa, and I would would like to have your opinion regarding the silence of African nations. Yes, in Africa we have a silence that borders on denialism. But we know very well that in several African nations harbor criminals and even protect them. And sometimes I wonder, and maybe I will direct this question to Jessica, because she's the one who talked about racist ideologies. And when we're talking about racism, it's mostly concerns black versus white. So what really is happening in Africa, So some countries harbor these criminals, protect them, and sometimes I have this impression that the theories regarding Bantu, Hamitic race plays a certain role. So there are some countries, depending on what you look like, you will be seen as one of theirs or not. And so basically, I would like to have your take on this silence that can be observed in Africa. I have another question. When Helen presented her book, there is a question that was asked to her, and I am not sure I understood the answer. She was asked, so when she was writing her book, what were her emotions? What were her feelings? I had the impression that the answer gave based on her answer that academics are people, they're human beings, they have feelings, they have emotions, and that when she was writing her book, she almost felt like she was in the shoes of a survivor. I was a bit concerned here because it brought to mind how the denialists think. Do you think that when these academics, when these denialists academics, when they write, when they propagate this ideology such as, Reagan's, Smith, wrong, do you think they put themselves in the shoes of the criminals? Do you think they become criminals themselves? If that is the case, this would be an opportunity for all of us, is an evil that we all have to fight vigorously. Thank you. Thank you, Valence.
Yes, I did mention it in my presentation, and I should probably elaborate. When we talk about racism, negrophobia, there's the internalized racism that gets involved. And this is something very powerful. Colonization did destroy all the foundational and political structures of our countries to erect westernized structures. And I spoke with Yolande Mukagasana, and there's a podcast that will actually come out on the Iwuka website. And she actually told me the story of her grandmother, who actually saw the first Westerners come in Rwanda. And basically, when she was going to school, when she was very little, going back home from school, her father would actually tell her that her grandmother would tell her the story of those Westerners that came in first, and to basically ignore what she was being told at school, which was a lie, although she was told to actually, always keep the school version when she was at school. So in the region, there are Africans that talk about these real Congolese, fake Congolese, those who are Hamites and Bantus. This is in the sub-region, but also in other regions. And for instance, we all regularly follow what's happening in Mayotte, and how from one island to the other, people can actually take up machetes and burn tents to treat their own brothers and sisters inferior human beings. And these are the consequences of colonialism. And this happens everywhere on the continent. And this is why it is important when we're actually telling our own stories, when every citizen from every country tells their own story, to actually start at the foundation. Who were we before colonization? And not speak about a fantasy, but rather speak about how the social structures were established, how they were decimated at a later stage. Because today, yes, we do have a problem of internalized racism throughout the continent, which is very powerful. And this is why we actually definitely appreciate the leadership in Rwanda, which reminds us that we have our own responsibilities to basically fight these kinds of ideologies. Helen? Yes, I would like to add that there could be an issue with the dissemination of history. The notion of and the history of Africa as it was imposed by the colonization actually intervenes. I believe there was a question that was asked by Valence about your book. Yes, I apologize. Now, feelings, emotions, and it's not going to be exclusively about empathy vis-a-vis the survivors, but it could also be disgust and fear and hatred against those that actually made them suffer. And I'm not sure if denialists do have this sentiment of empathy with the perpetrators. I'm not sure. But I believe that one of their arguments is and I'm thinking about Philip Regents, for instance, or André Gishawa, who is in the realm of relativism, who is in the realm of relativism. They actually prevail themselves with objectivity, and whenever they cite the name of a political person, they actually write Hutu Gisenyi, Hutu Butare, and basically, kind of assigns a certain identity as well as their political trajectory. And for them, it's actually a proof of objectivity, according to him anyways. And personally, I think it would be best for the readers of such books to make their own interpretations of such fact. Yes, we're almost coming to the end. I'll give Bideri and Richard a minute to conclude. Yes, just a clarification regarding the question that was asked by the gentleman in regards to the lack of involvement of our neighbors in Africa. He actually spoke about the silence of some of our African brothers and sisters. And I'll actually share some numbers which are really sad to share. And Dr. Bideri would probably know more about this, but this was a count that I made in August last year. And you're probably aware that the majority of the genociders who fled actually went to the neighboring countries and other countries in Africa. But of the 29 countries that were, individuals who were extradited in Rwanda, or to Rwanda rather, there was only Uganda with 3 perpetrators, the DRC with 4, Malawi with 1, and Congo-Brazza with 1 person. So there's more alleged perpetrators that have been coming from the West than from African countries. Yes, thank you very much. Now, to answer the question of Ambassador Valence regarding the silence of some African countries. Well, it is clear that there's quite a number of arrest warrants that have been sent to African countries that have been completely ignored, particularly in the DRC and in Uganda. This is the sad truth. But in my opinion, I should say, in international law, there's something that we call civilized nations. And this is in the text. When conventions are signed, ratified, it is on behalf of civilized nations. So when there's a convention on the prevention and repression of the crime of genocide, there is an international responsibility to actually arrest, judge, or extradite alleged perpetrators, at least for civilized nations. But when we look at these so-called civilized nations, spending years without taking custody of those alleged perpetrators that they're harboring and wait until they die to raise a case, we should actually wonder whether these are civilized nations. Because if there's a reason for not bringing such cases to front, we should ask ourselves why. When you sign such conventions, you must assume full responsibility for its implementation. And I will not cite any more countries. And let's speak about the case of Kabuga, who was a fugitive, was arrested, but for some reason is not being tried. So, you know, being civilized, I guess, is very relative, especially when it comes to people who call themselves civilized. And I think there are some people who are probably more civilized than others. And probably, you know, some people that we actually think about least. The DRC and Uganda have the most number of arrest warrants that have not been tried or extradited. And I actually wonder, what's the status of Agathe Uwilingiyimana in Paris? The State Council has actually rejected her appeal to become a citizen. So she does not have any status in France. She should be extradited. But why is she being kept in Paris? So I will not bring any answer to this question, and I'm not expecting you to get an answer, but those are questions we should ask ourselves. Thank you very much, Dr. Bideri, and we're coming to the end of our session. I'd like to thank Dr. Diogène Bideri, a legal expert. Thank you very much, Doctor. I'd like to thank Hélène Dumas, a historian who helped us a great deal during this debate. I'd like to thank Richard Gisagara, a lawyer who works here in Rwanda, but also in France. I'd like to thank Jessica Mwiza for her contribution. And last but not least, I'd like to thank Dr. Ioana Coulibaly. So I'll remind you that there will be a film titled a half hill in the Micolina, and I thank you all for having taken part in this debate, and wishing you all a pleasant evening.